Hi, I'm Erin Theodorou. I'm a therapist at a new counseling in Oradell, New Jersey, and today I would like to take a few minutes to discuss anxiety and some signs your child may be experiencing anxiety, and to offer some tips for parents how they could best help their child to cope. Anxiety is something that is very commonplace with children of all ages, whether your child is in elementary school, middle school, or high school. It is very common for children to have some level of anxiety at different courses of their development. The issue might be that often as a parent, we can't say with certainty if our child is struggling with anxiety. So, with a younger child, they might not be able to explain their feelings or truly understand what's bothering them in a way that they could articulate yet. Often that's why a therapist is going to do play therapy with a younger child, because play is a way that children that are younger express their feelings and emotions. And then on the other hand, someone that, is at the middle school age, the high school age, they may be able to understand what's bothering them, but that's no guarantee that they're going to share that information with their parents. But anxiety for a person of any age, including children, becomes a problem when the anxiety and fear is disproportionate to what they're worried about. So if you find that your child is worrying at a level that goes above and beyond what other children their age are experiencing, that might be a moment to take pause and look to see what's going on deeper. And I often find as a parent, it could be hard to distinguish between the run-of-the-mill anxiety that's usual and typical and fully know for sure when your child is trending towards an anxiety disorder, especially if you have no previous framework for anxiety. If you never really struggled with it yourself or no one close to you did, it may be hard to know how to begin assisting your child. I think some anxiety is normal and helpful. It's going to help a child to succeed at home and school. And it's going to be normal to feel anxious for many common things that happen over our childhood. Taking a test, or the first day of school, or performing in the school play. Totally normal if your child is feeling a little bit anxious about that. Some common fears I'll hear from children, that they're worried about no one liking them, or not having someone to sit with at lunch, or what if they get lost, or what if something bad happens. And for the most part, these are common fears that all kids will express at one point or another. We would expect a child to be nervous if they're going to the doctor's office for shots, or if they're facing a new situation or challenge. But I think many times parents may confuse anxiety with behavioral problems, mainly because anxiety tends to manifest in behavioral changes in children. And I would say one big indicator that your child is struggling with anxiety is if they're coming home and saying it's very hard for them to get through the school day, or they're becoming afraid to go to school. School refusal might be becoming an issue, where in the morning it's becoming a big to-do to get them out the door. I would say if you find that your child is withdrawing from their friends or family, maybe they used to sit in the family room and do their homework and now they're locking themselves away in their bedroom. If you notice different changes in their attitude, or they're now struggling academically when they used to do their homework and get their classwork done, these are all reasons to take pause. Basically, if your child is having any change in their ability to function in their day-to-day life, that's a sign that something deeper may be going on. And childhood anxiety can be tricky. Therefore, you might be asking yourself, what are some common indicators of an anxiety disorder in my child? I would say number one, frequent meltdowns. So we all know when toddlers are turning 2, it's notorious that they have tantrums. But children of all ages could have tantrums. And normally a child, whether they're in elementary school, middle school, or high school, is going to have an outburst when their ability to cope is being overwhelmed. So when they feel that they can't get through a situation and they're overwhelmed, they might lash out. So behavioral changes in children, whether it's moodiness, clinginess, your child is constantly seeking reassurance from you. They might be someone that used to be laid back and they're suddenly acting out more aggressively. These are all common indicators of anxiety. Irritability is a big common way anxiety manifests. And more often than not, children work very hard to internalize their anxiety. When they're at school, which is namely the place outside of the home that they're out in the world, they may, really keep their fears and anxieties internalized. and they may come home and lash out because it took everything in them to get through the school day. They're probably going to be exhausted from trying to quiet their anxious mind and just get through the day. And they're just going to become tapped out and unglued, and they may lash out when they get home. So if you find that your older child is starting to have tantrums or struggling to regulate their emotions, this could be a sign that anxiety is lurking underneath the surface. A second big one, and I kind of touched on it a little bit already, issues related to school. So it's very common for a teacher to see signs of anxiety in a child because they see them every day in class. And school is a pivotal part of a child's day. And oftentimes, if a child's struggling with anxiety, it may manifest in the classroom. A child may start to struggle with staying on task. They may have difficulty concentrating. They may be fidgeting more. They may want to keep leaving the classroom. They may even start getting in trouble at school. When we're anxious, often our frustration tolerance gets lower, and we may lash out at other students in the class. A common thing I find is that a child that's anxious will start visiting the school nurse more often. They might complain of stomach aches and headaches and other psychosomatic symptoms. A child may also start visiting the school counselor more often because they feel so uncomfortable in class from their anxiety that they need to get out of that environment. Thus, often someone at school might reach out to you to share their concerns about what's going on with your child at school. Or you might find your own child complaining about school. They might say that it's very hard for them to get through the school day. They might say they don't feel like going to school. Now, of course, every child occasionally says they don't feel like going to school. That's perfectly normal. But if consistently and routinely your child is making a big to-do about not wanting to go to school and refusing to go, that may be an indicator that anxiety is driving that behavior. Another big sign of anxiety, sleep disturbances. If your child is complaining that they're struggling to fall asleep or stay asleep, any appetite changes, a child is not eating as much as they used to or eating too little, either extreme. Like I said, physical complaints. Stomach aches and headaches are the two big ones that most anxious children complain about in terms of physical ailments, but it could run the gamut. They could complain about muscle aches, shortness of breath, feeling dizzy, racing heart. These are all common physical symptoms of how anxiety manifests. The truth is, anxious kids can and do worry themselves sick. And parents, I think, will often take their children to the pediatrician. And when the pediatrician rules out any medical reason for these physical symptoms, the pediatrician will often refer the child and the family to counseling. Another big sign of anxiety in your child is if your child is withdrawing from family and friends. If they're avoiding certain places or things, they used to like to go to their friend's house on the weekend. Now they just want to stay at home and hide in their room. They used to like playing a sport, and now they just want to quit, and they don't want to do any of the things that used to bring them joy or happiness. Anxiety also can manifest with certain children in hyperactivity. So if your child is suddenly bouncing off the walls, or they seem very hyperactive or hypervigilant, they might be misdiagnosed with ADHD when it's really anxiety. And there's a lot of overlap between ADHD and anxiety. And as I'm going over these symptoms, it's really important that you seek help if you find your child's experiencing this, because if left untreated, this anxiety could follow a child into adulthood. And, we really want to treat this and nip it in the bud when we first seeing it come into play. So you may be wondering, how do you support your anxious child? And it's important, I think, for parents to develop their own strategies to help their anxious child, because parenting is critical in helping a child that's struggling with anxiety. I often say as a counselor, the parenting piece is the most important work we do as counselors, because we might see that child once a week for a session, but the parent is the trusted adult who's with them day in and day out, and who they're going to be turning to for support and reassurance. So the first piece of advice I would have is acceptance. You want to accept that there is an anxiety problem. And, this could be difficult as a parent because it could be hard to watch your child struggle. And we want them to be successful and engaged in life. But we also need to be able to do this at their pace. So you want to empathize with your child, and you also want to help them to figure out what their anxiety triggers are. Often it could be school-related stress. It could be overscheduling if they feel overwhelmed with all the things they have to do. Or it could be changes in the family, such as death of a grandparent, or if your family system is going through a divorce or a move. Many times I think anxiety gets brought on by academic pressure, especially as we see children getting closer to high school. And it could also be something in the external world. Like right now with this pandemic going on, I know a lot of children are struggling with more intense levels of anxiety. And, we want to look at what's driving this behavior. So the next piece of advice I'd have for parents is we want to start to look for how this anxiety is being expressed. What is your child doing? What words are they saying? Look at the situation where the anxiety is really amping up. Normally there are patterns to anxiety and there are different triggers. So you're going to want to start maybe keeping a log of when you see your child start to display their most intense symptoms of anxiety. You want to look at their behavior, their trigger, and just really pay mind to their behavior. Next, we want to figure out how we could help a child face those fears. I think often a child will feel bad when they're struggling with anxiety. I've often heard children say they feel like there's something wrong with them, and we want to normalize that some anxiety is just part of the human experience and there isn't anything fundamentally wrong with them, and let them know that we are going to work on this and we are going to figure out ways to deal with it and cope with it, and let them know that they will get through to the other side. I think it's important for any child that struggles with anxiety that they have a routine. Routine's very important to children that struggle with anxiety, so you're going to want to be consistent as a parent with their schedule. You are also, as a parent, going to want to model expectations and be able to modify those expectations during periods of high stress. So whatever you could do to scale back on a child's schedule when they're really at a high end of anxiety, I think would be beneficial. And a real important piece of advice I would have for any parent is be mindful of your own anxiety levels. You want to be cognizant if you use a loud voice and yell a lot, or if you threaten, which could exacerbate a child's anxiety. You really want to start to pay attention to your own behavior. I find it's very common that parents will ask questions that kind of exacerbate a child's anxiety. Asking, are you going to be okay? Do you need anything? Could I do anything? Like almost being anxious yourself. And we're coming from a good place. We're trying to help, but we're really making our child more anxious. So you really want to pay mind to, how you're speaking to your child. And if you're asking leading questions, that could be, exacerbating their anxiety. And another important step in helping children overcome their fears is helping them to think about how they view things and help them develop a more realistic framework. Children lack experience in the world, and a lot of their information comes from TV, social media. You want to start to monitor what your child's watching, what they're looking at on the internet. Often they could develop an unrealistic expectation of bad things happening in their lives based on what they've seen on TV or seen on the internet. So we want to be really careful to monitor that information and see what they're taking in, because that could be impacting their perceptions and expectations. And as a counselor, often with an anxious child, what we're going to be working on is CBT, which is cognitive behavior therapy. And I'm going to be working with them to see what are their cognitions, what are their perceptions, and how is that impacting their feelings and their behaviors. And we're going to work on reframing and getting them to a more positive mental framework. So as a parent, we're going to want to work with our child on the worry. There's lots of great workbooks, even on Amazon. If you Google different anxiety workbooks for whatever age your child is, there's lots of great resources out there. And we want to start helping on our end, our child develop a more realistic perception of the situation. So for example, I once worked with a child who was afraid of tornadoes. And we all know tornadoes can be very destructive. And his fear had developed from watching a movie where a tornado had destroyed a whole community. And then he was afraid that, a tornado would blow through the town. And even though, we live in New Jersey and I've been living here for many years and we've never had a tornado, knock on wood, that I know of. And I know his mom had said, well, if we asked our family and friends, most would probably say they've never seen a tornado. But because this child had seen it in a movie, they were now afraid that it was likely to have it happen. So you kind of want to put whatever the fear is in perspective. Like, say, I've never seen a tornado and it's very unlikely a tornado will happen, but also say, besides the fact that tornadoes are very rare, well, what would we do if we heard a huge roar? Like, a tornado sounds like a train coming on, so we'd probably go into the basement and we would do what we can until the noise passes. So we're switching from reassuring to problem solving. So that leads me to my next point, which is, I think a common problem that parents do, and they're well-meaning when they do this, is offer too much reassurance. We want to be careful not to give our child too much reassurance and switch to problem solving in a collaborative way, because reassurance has a way of making a child more anxious and dependent on you to reassure them instead of developing their own coping skills and ability to calm themselves down. So, of course, as a parent, we feel a strong desire to comfort our child and make them feel safe. But we could often be making their anxiety worse by providing too much reassurance, despite our best intentions not to. So we're going to want to, as a parent, work with our children on developing coping skills and problem-solving skills. We want to help our children to generate solutions themselves, and we're also empowering them to overcome their own fears. So, for instance, if a child is afraid of changing for gym class at school, which is something, I've worked with children before on, one way to help them is think about what they're feeling and see what ideas they have to solve the problem themselves. I think kids often have great ideas on how to solve problems, and it also gives them a great chance to develop that self-efficacy and take control of the situation and build confidence and help them to better handle problems in the future. If we brainstorm with them, well, what could we do if you feel, uncomfortable changing for gym class? And we can figure something out. So, as I said, children with anxiety often seek reassurance to handle their anxiety, but this could actually make the anxiety worse. So we're going to want to help them develop coping skills to overcome their fear and better face challenges in the future. So I know a common fear I think middle school age children have is when they start middle school, having someone to sit with them at lunch. So for instance, if your child was saying that they're worried about going to school because they're worried no one will sit with them at lunch, you could gently remind them, like, oh, well, Livy and Sue were in your lunch period last year and you sat with them, and they're in your lunch period this year, so you'll probably have someone to sit with at lunch since they'll be there. I don't see, you'll have two people that and that is kind of, using the example of something that they're worried about that in the past worked out okay. And that's a common strategy I like to give parents, is that when a child starts to worry, we go over all the things they worried about that never came to fruition. And another helpful tip I think for parents is to, as a family, adopt healthy self-care strategies. So eating healthy, exercise, modeling for your child how to manage stress in a healthy way. Our kids are always looking to us to see not what we say, but what we do. So we want to set a good self-care model for them. And next, I would say one of the most important thing a parent could do to help their child face any fear is to help break it down step by step. The old saying, feel the fear and do it anyway. Well, that's what we're going to want to do with our child. So for an example, say you have a younger child who is afraid of swimming lessons, that for some reason they have an irrational fear of getting in the pool and swimming. So perhaps the first step we would take as a parent is just take them to a pool and have them watch other people swim. And they're not going to go in the water or go near the water. They're just watching other people swim. And this is much better than telling your child, like, okay, well, if you're afraid to swim, forget about it. Like, then we're not going to do the swim lessons. And I think despite being well-meaning, this is something often parents do, especially when we ourselves are frustrated or overwhelmed. It's very easy to just kind of like kick the can down the road. And that's going to often make a child's fear grow exponentially. So it's much better to help your child take small steps towards facing the fear, no matter how small the step is. So going back to the example of if your child's afraid to swim in the pool, after going and just watching other people swim, maybe the next step is they are going to just put their feet in the water. And what I like to tell a child is that we are just going to do that and not anymore. We're just going to put our feet in that example. And we let them do just that. Because sometimes I think kids will often go into a pool in that example, have their feet in for 10 minutes, and think, okay, well, this is not bad. Maybe I'm going to go jump in. And as a clinician, I want them to be able to have the perception that they've done more than they had to do, not that they couldn't do the next step. So you don't want them going to go jump in and then getting afraid, and then the whole experience kind of comes out as a net negative. So after that step, maybe for a child that's afraid of swimming, the next step would be to go into the water with a trusted adult, have them put their life vest on, and just splash around in the water and have fun. So basically, we're doing baby steps to work their way up to facing the fear. And the more exposure we do and the closer in time the steps, the better. So this is the basic concept of exposure therapy, and it's how we as parents can use incremental steps to help a child overcome their fear. And finally, if these strategies are not working, when should a parent seek help? I would say, number one, if the anxiety is occurring more frequently and if it's occurring more intensely, you would want to consider seeking counseling. So if a stomach ache is happening every day, or your child is seeking reassurance every day, this may be a little concerning. Or the intensity of the fear. If your child is becoming anxious or afraid of things that didn't used to be bothersome to them, for instance, throwing a tantrum about going to school and this happens repeatedly, that could be a concern. Or I think if your child is having a fear reaction to something that is innocuous that another child their age wouldn't have a similar reaction to, like if your child's becoming afraid to go to a birthday party or a play date, that could be a reason to maybe seek out treatment. And lastly, really the level of interference. As I started the video, I said anxiety becomes an issue when it's interfering with your ability to function. So if anxiety is starting to interfere with your child's social life, home life, school, work, those are all reasons it might be time to seek help. And to that end, I hope you have found this video helpful. If you find your child is in need of counseling, once again, I am Theodorou. I'm a therapist at a new counseling services in Oradell, New Jersey. And please feel free to reach out to me, and be well.